The Pentagon's cold corridors have witnessed 1,000 secrets, but none as dangerous as the one buried in its digital heart. A woman stands at the window of her Boston apartment, silver threading through her dark hair, eyes fixed on the rain-slicked streets below. The alert on her screen pulses red. Someone has breached a system that shouldn't be breachable. 3,000 miles away, a man with military-bearing flexes, bloodied knuckles, surveying an unconscious intruder on his server room floor. The scar along his jaw, a souvenir from Vietnam, seems to tighten as he realizes what's been stolen. Time builds walls between moments, between people, between what we were and what we've become, between trust and betrayal, between love lost and never found again. But some walls aren't meant to protect, they're meant to isolate, to contain, to control. And when they finally crumble, the collapse changes everything. The amber glow of sunset filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Eleanor Harlow's Boston apartment, casting long shadows across her minimalist living room. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced precision, eyes narrowed behind reading glasses as she tracked the digital intruder through layers of security protocols. 3 monitors displayed cascading code, network maps, and firewall alerts. "Not today," she muttered, executing a series of commands that would make hackers half her age weep with envy. At 58, Eleanor moved with the confidence of someone who had spent decades mastering her craft. Her silver-streaked dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, laugh lines framing eyes that missed nothing. She had been about to pour her evening glass of Cabernet when the alert had come in a sophisticated breach attempt on the Boston Federal Reserve's network. The attack signature was unlike anything she'd seen before, an elegant piece of malicious code that seemed to anticipate standard security responses. This wasn't some cryptocurrency hustler or basement-dwelling anarchist. This was an artist of digital warfare. "Where are you?" she whispered, isolating a packet stream that revealed the attacker's path through the system. Eleanor's home office, a converted second bedroom with a view of the Charles River, housed more computing power than most corporate IT departments. The FBI might have her on their consultant roster, but she preferred working from her own equipment. 7 years after leaving the bureau, old habits died hard. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call from Deputy Director Landry. She tapped her earpiece without breaking her typing rhythm. "I'm tracking them now. Marcus." How bad? His voice carried the weight of imminent disaster. "They're good, better than anyone I've seen in years. They've already breached the outer security layer of the Federal Reserve System. Christ, can you stop them?" Eleanor allowed herself a small smile. "What do you think I've been doing for the past 20 minutes? Her fingers executed a complex sequence. Deploying a countermeasure, she had developed herself a digital tripwire that would reveal the attacker's true entry point while simultaneously corrupting their connection. "I've almost—" The screen flickered, code patterns shifting. "They've spotted me. They're retreating. Let them go. We need to secure the system." "No." Eleanor's voice hardened. "This isn't some random attack. These people have a signature. If I can capture it now, we'll recognize them next time." She launched a tracer program, following the digital breadcrumbs as the attacker hastily withdrew from the system. For several breathless minutes, she pursued them through server after server, across continents, through anonymous relays. "Got you," she finally whispered, isolating an IP address before it could vanish behind a sophisticated proxy. She quickly deployed a passive monitor that would record any future activity from this source without alerting them to its presence. Only then did she sit back in her chair, removing her glasses to rub the bridge of her nose. "Eleanor." "You still there?" Marcus prompted. "The immediate threat is neutralized, but this wasn't some random hack. It was a reconnaissance mission. They were mapping the system architecture, looking for something specific." "Any idea what—" "Not yet, but I'll find out." She glanced at the photograph on her desk herself in a younger day, standing beside a tall man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Michael. Gone 7 years now. Cancer." "I always do. I need you in Washington tomorrow. Euro 900 hours. Pentagon. Something bigger is happening. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. The Pentagon. This is beyond a banking system breach, isn't it? Much bigger? There was a physical break-in at Ironclad Defense headquarters tonight, simultaneous with your digital intruder. Their CEO thinks the incidents are connected. Ironclad, the name alone sent a ripple of tension through her shoulders. Richard Blackwood's company. You know him. Eleanor's gaze drifted to the rain now pattering against her windows. Memory surfacing of a case file from 20 years ago. Only by reputation. I'll be there. As she ended the call, her monitor pinged with an automated alert. The system had identified a partial match to the attack signature in its database. Eleanor leaned forward, pulse quickening as she opened the file. The code pattern shared distinctive elements with a security protocol she had developed 15 years ago, proprietary work that had been stolen by her former colleague, Victor Reynolds, work that should never have seen the light of day. Victor, she whispered, a cold knot forming in her stomach. What have you done? 500 miles away. Richard Blackwood wiped blood from his knuckles as he surveyed the damaged server room of Ironclad Defense's Washington headquarters. At 62, his 6'2" frame remained imposing, military bearing evident in his straight posture and watchful stance. Salt and pepper hair was cut short, practical, while a thin scar traced his jawline, a souvenir from Vietnam that had faded but never disappeared, much like the memories of that time. Status report, he demanded, addressing the security team now sweeping the room for evidence. 2 intruders, sir, reported his head of physical security, a former SEAL named Carter. They knew exactly where the biometric scanners were located and how to bypass them. They accessed server cluster B for approximately 3 minutes before the alarm triggered. Richard's eyes narrowed. Server cluster B housed their most sensitive government contract data, including the vulnerability assessment they'd recently completed for the Department of Defense. His gaze drifted to the unconscious man zip-tied on the floor, one of the intruders who hadn't been quick enough to escape when Richard himself had responded to the breach alert. And the other one got away through the service corridor. Traffic cameras lost him 6 blocks south. Richard flexed his right hand, feeling the satisfying ache of knuckles that had connected with the captured intruder's jaw. At his age, most CEOs would delegate security responses to their teams, but Richard Blackwood wasn't most CEOs. What did they access? He asked, turning to the young woman already working at the terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she ran diagnostics. They were targeting the Achilles protocol files. Sir, she replied, not looking up. Specifically, the vulnerability we identified in the missile defense system network architecture. Richard felt ice form in his veins. The Achilles protocol was their most classified project, a comprehensive security audit of America's nuclear defense systems. Ironclad had discovered a catastrophic vulnerability that could potentially allow outside access to command systems. They were 2 weeks away from delivering the completed security patch. Did they get it? Preliminary analysis suggests they downloaded approximately 60% of the files before the alarm triggered. The data was encrypted, but anyone sophisticated enough to breach our systems might eventually crack the encryption. Richard finished, his voice grim. His phone vibrated with an incoming call, the direct line that only a handful of people possessed. The screen displayed, Pentagon, secure line. Blackwood, he answered. We need to meet 0900 tomorrow. Briefing room Alpha 7. The voice belonged to General Harrison, Joint Chiefs of Staff. There's been a coordinated attack on the Federal Reserve Systems in Boston. We believe it's connected to your breach. My security team is still assessing the damage. Bring what you have. We're bringing in a specialist to consult. Richard's jaw tightened. With all due respect, General, Ironclad doesn't need outside consultants. This isn't a request. Blackwood, the specialist is Eleanor Harlow, former FBI cybercrime, now private. She intercepted the Boston attack. A flicker of recognition crossed Richard's face. The name triggered a distant memory, a case file from 2 decades ago that had briefly crossed his desk during his final years in Army intelligence. Rio 900. Richard confirmed before ending the call. He turned to find his son Thomas standing in the doorway. At 36, Thomas shared his father's height and strong features, though his expression typically carried more diplomacy than Richard's direct intensity. "How bad?" Thomas asked, surveying the damaged server room. "Potentially catastrophic." Richard answered honestly. "Call the executive team. Emergency meeting in 1 hour." As Thomas left to make the arrangements, Richard moved to the window, gazing out at the Washington skyline. Somewhere out there, someone was assembling the pieces of a puzzle that could threaten national security at the most fundamental level. And somehow, after all these years, Eleanor Harlow's name had resurfaced in connection to it all. Richard couldn't help but wonder if this was mere coincidence, or if the ghosts of the past were finally catching up to them both. The Pentagon briefing room held the sterile efficiency of spaces where the fate of nations was routinely decided. Eleanor arrived 15 minutes early, pausing at the security checkpoint to surrender her phone and submit to the comprehensive screening. She had dressed for battle in a charcoal pantsuit, minimal jewelry, and low heels that wouldn't impede movement if necessary, old habits from her field agent days. The overnight train from Boston had given her time to review what little information Marcus had been able to share, along with her own research into ironclad defense and its founder, Richard Blackwood, former Army intelligence, Bronze Star recipient from Vietnam, widower, built ironclad from nothing after leaving the military, transforming it from a small consulting firm into one of the most respected cybersecurity companies in the world. Known for personal integrity but ruthless business tactics, the door opened, and Eleanor instinctively knew it was him before turning something in the deliberate way the door closed. The measured footsteps, the subtle shift in the room's energy. Richard Blackwood stood taller than his dossier photos suggested, his physical presence commanding attention without visible effort. His eyes, a penetrating blue that had surely softened with age but lost none of their sharpness, assessed her with military precision. "Ms. Harlow," he acknowledged with a slight nod, "your reputation precedes you, as does yours, Mr. Blackwood." Eleanor met his gaze directly, neither offering her hand nor breaking eye contact. "I've studied Ironclad's approach to integrated security systems. Impressive work." A flicker of surprise crossed his face before disappearing behind professional courtesy. "Thank you, though I'm curious why the Bureau would send a consultant rather than a field team for something of this magnitude. I'm not here representing the FBI." Eleanor placed her briefcase on the table. "I work independently now. Director Landry brought me in because I recognized the attack signature." Before Richard could respond, the door opened again as General Harrison entered, followed by Deputy Director Landry and 3 other officials whose security badges identified them as representing Homeland Security, the NSA, and the Department of Energy. "Let's get started," Harrison announced without preamble. "We have a situation that potentially threatens our most critical defense infrastructure." For the next 30 minutes, Eleanor and Richard each presented their findings. Eleanor detailing the sophisticated attack on the Federal Reserve System, Richard outlining the physical breach at Ironclad and the data that had been compromised. The timing and sophistication of both attacks suggests a coordinated effort by a well-funded organization. Richard concluded, "Possibly state-sponsored." "Not state-sponsored," Eleanor countered, bringing up a code sample on the screen. "The digital fingerprint contains elements that are distinctly personal." "Meaning," Harrison prompted, 15 years ago, I developed an adaptive security protocol while working with a private research team. The code was stolen by a colleague who disappeared with it. I'm seeing modified fragments of that code in these attacks." Richard's eyes narrowed. "You're suggesting this is targeted at you personally?" "Not at me," Eleanor clarified. "The code itself was designed to identify and exploit recursive security patterns, precisely the kind used in high-level government systems. In the wrong hands, it could be weaponized exactly as we're seeing now." "This colleague," Landry interjected, "Victor Reynolds, He resurfaced about 10 years ago as chief security officer at Global Tech Industries. Eleanor nodded, keeping her expression neutral despite the flash of old paint at the name. Victor was brilliant but ethically flexible. If he's involved in this, we're dealing with someone who intimately understands how our security systems think, which means conventional countermeasures will fail, Richard concluded, reluctantly acknowledging the validity of her assessment. General Harrison leaned forward. So what's your recommendation? Eleanor and Richard exchanged a glance. Momentary rivals finding unexpected common ground. We need to work outside normal channels, Eleanor began. Create a security protocol they won't anticipate, Richard continued. Something new that doesn't follow established patterns, she added. A hybrid approach combining digital and physical security measures. He finished. Harrison looked between them, a hint of satisfaction in his expression. That's why you're both here? Miss Harlow, we're contracting you to work directly with Ironclad on developing this countermeasure and tracking down the source of the attacks. Richard's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. General, with all due respect, Ironclad has the resources to handle this internally. This isn't optional. Blackwood, Harrison replied firmly. The Pentagon is officially engaging both of you. Ms. Harlow brings expertise that complements your team's capabilities. Eleanor recognized the barely contained resistance in Richard's stance, a man accustomed to complete control now forced to accept an outsider into his operation. She had encountered his type before, brilliant, dedicated, and fiercely protective of their domain. I work independently, Mr. Blackwood, she said, addressing him directly. I'm not interested in corporate espionage or disrupting your operation. I'm interested in stopping whoever is using my stolen work to threaten national security. Something shifted in Richard's expression, not quite acceptance, but a grudging recognition of shared purpose. My security clearance requirements are non-negotiable, he stated. I've held top-secret clearance since 1985. Eleanor countered smoothly. I'm sure Director Landry can expedite the necessary updates. The meeting concluded with logistical details. Eleanor would report to Ironclad's headquarters the following morning to begin the collaboration. As they gathered their materials, Richard paused beside her. Ms. Harlow, he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. My company's work protects millions of lives. I'll cooperate with this arrangement, but understand that my priority remains the integrity of our systems and the safety of our clients. Eleanor met his gaze, unflinching. Mr. Blackwood, someone stole my life's work and is using it to threaten the security of our nation. My priority is stopping them by any means necessary. If that aligns with your goals, we'll work well together. A hint of something respect, perhaps flickered in his eyes before he nodded once and departed. Eleanor watched him go, cataloging details with the practiced eye of a former investigator. Richard Blackwood moved like a man who had spent decades carrying invisible weight, his military bearing both armor and identity. She recognized the pattern because she wore a similar one herself, the hyper-vigilance of someone who had lost too much to ever fully relax their guard again. Tomorrow would be interesting indeed. The Ironclad Defense Headquarters rose like a modern fortress in the heart of Darcy's technology corridor, 15 stories of gleaming glass and steel with security measures that rivaled many government facilities. Eleanor passed through 3 checkpoints before reaching the executive floor, aware of the subtle scrutiny from security personnel, clearly instructed to watch the outsider. Richard was waiting in the conference room, along with a team he introduced with military brevity: Thomas Blackwood, VP of Operations, Dr. Lisa Chen, Chief Technology Officer, James Carter, Head of Physical Security, and Sophia Davis, Lead Systems Architect. Ms. Harlow will be working with us temporarily on the Achilles Protocol breach, Richard explained, his tone making it clear this arrangement wasn't his preference. She has relevant expertise in the attack methodology we encountered. Eleanor noted the protective glance Thomas cast toward his father, the professional curiosity from Chen and Davis, and the undisguised suspicion from Carter. Typical responses to an outsider suddenly thrust into a tight-knit security team. "I appreciate your cooperation," Eleanor said, addressing the room. "I've prepared a preliminary analysis of the attack signatures from both incidents." She connected her secure laptop to the display system, bringing up comparison diagrams of the code patterns. "As you can see, both attacks, the Federal Reserve breach and your server infiltration, share distinctive command structures. They appear different on the surface but function identically at their core." Dr. Chen leaned forward, intelligent eyes narrowing behind stylish glasses. "This baseline architecture, it's unlike anything in our threat database because it was never publicly deployed," Eleanor confirmed. "This is derived from Project Demeter, a security protocol I developed in 2008 that was designed to adapt to emerging threats through pattern recognition. The original code was stolen before implementation by Victor Reynolds," Richard stated, having clearly done his research overnight. Eleanor nodded. "Victor was my research partner. He disappeared with the complete codebase after we had a fundamental disagreement about its potential applications." "What kind of disagreement?" Thomas asked, his tone suggesting professional interest rather than accusation. "I designed Demeter as a defensive system," Eleanor explained, keeping her voice even despite the old wound this discussion reopened. "Victor saw its potential as an offensive weapon. The system's ability to learn security patterns meant it could also learn to break them. And now someone's using it exactly as he intended," Richard concluded. "Yes, but with 15 years of refinement." Eleanor brought up another screen showing the evolution of the code. "Whoever deployed this has substantially enhanced the original architecture. It's not just Victor working alone." "Global tech," Lisa Chen suggested. "They've been aggressively expanding their government contracts division." "Possibly," Eleanor acknowledged. "But this attack is too personal, too specific. Victor always had an artistic flair to his coding little signatures that weren't strictly necessary, but satisfied his ego. I'm not seeing those here." "So someone else has his work," Richard summarized. "And they're using it to target both the financial system and defense infrastructure simultaneously, which suggests a larger objective than mere theft or espionage," Eleanor confirmed. "They're testing capabilities, probing for weaknesses before something bigger." For the next several hours, they dissected the attacks in microscopic detail, identifying patterns and potential vulnerabilities. Despite the initial tension, Eleanor found the ironclad team impressively competent, particularly Lisa Chen, whose analytical mind complemented Eleanor's investigative approach. Richard remained largely silent, observing the collaboration with inscrutable focus. Only occasionally would he interject with incisive questions that revealed the strategic mind behind his company's success. By late afternoon, they had developed a preliminary defense protocol and established continuous monitoring of systems displaying similar vulnerabilities. As the team dispersed to implement various aspects of the plan, Richard gestured for Eleanor to remain. "My office," he said simply, leading her down a corridor to a corner suite with commanding views of the city. Unlike the stereotypical executive office designed to intimidate, Richard's space was functional and surprisingly Spartan. Military memorabilia shared shelf space with family photographs, a younger Richard in uniform, a beautiful dark-haired woman who must be his late wife, Thomas, and a young woman Eleanor presumed was his daughter Rebecca. "You identified patterns my team missed," Richard acknowledged, offering her a seat across from his desk. "I don't easily admit when I'm wrong, Miss Harlow, but your involvement appears to be beneficial." Coming from him, Eleanor recognized this as significant concession. "Your team is exceptional, Mr. Blackwood. I'm merely contributing specialized knowledge about a system I unfortunately know too well." Richard studied her for a moment. "You said Victor Reynolds was your research partner. The file I reviewed suggests your relationship was more complex than that." Eleanor felt a flash of irritation. "You've been investigating me." "Of course I have." He made no apology for it. "You've been granted access to my company's most sensitive projects. Due diligence is standard procedure. Then you already know Victor was briefly my fiancé before he became my biggest professional regret." Eleanor met his gaze directly, refusing to show discomfort at this intrusion into her past. A mistake I've spent 15 years ensuring I never repeat. Something shifted in Richard's expression, not quite sympathy, but perhaps recognition. Trust is a luxury in our line of work. Yes, Eleanor agreed, which is why I'll be transparent about my methods and findings while I'm here, and I expect the same courtesy. Richard nodded, then unexpectedly changed direction. Have you eaten today? The question caught her off guard. I had coffee this morning. It's nearly 7. The cafeteria is closed, but there's a decent Italian place 2 blocks from here. We can continue our discussion over dinner. Eleanor weighed the invitation, recognizing it as both professional necessity and possibly an olive branch from a man unaccustomed to extending them. That would be acceptable, she replied, matching his formal tone while suppressing a smile at the awkwardness of it all. 2 people, well past the age of social uncertainty, navigating a simple dinner invitation like diplomats brokering a treaty. Salvatore's was indeed decent, a quiet establishment with private booths and a wine list that suggested the owner appreciated quality without pretension. Eleanor studied the menu while surreptitiously observing Richard. Away from his corporate domain, subtle changes emerged in his demeanor. His posture remained military straight, but some of the guardedness had receded from his expression. Their risotto is excellent, he noted, setting aside his own menu. Though I usually opt for the veal saltimbocca. You come here often, once a week or so. Thomas introduced me to it after. He hesitated almost imperceptibly. After Margaret passed, he thought I needed to occasionally leave the office and remember that food exists. Eleanor recognized the brief pause, the careful navigation around personal loss. She knew it intimately. Children have a way of parenting us when they think we're not paying attention, she offered, thinking of her own daughter's concerned calls and surprise visits after Michael died. A genuine smile briefly transformed Richard's face, softening the stern lines around his eyes. Thomas is subtle about it. Rebecca is more direct. She once threatened to move back home if I didn't start behaving like a human being instead of a security algorithm. Eleanor found herself returning his smile. My daughter Sophia used similar tactics. She's a doctor in Seattle now, but she still calls every Sunday to make sure I'm not spending the entire weekend working. And are you spending the entire weekend working? Not anymore? Eleanor took a sip of the excellent Barolo the waiter had brought. I've learned some balance in recent years. You, Richard's expression suggested rueful self-awareness. I'm still working on that lesson. The company became everything after Margaret died. A purpose beyond myself. Eleanor nodded, understanding completely. After Michael passed, I threw myself into consulting work, 70, 80-hour weeks, anything to keep moving, to exhaust myself enough that I could sleep without dreaming. The shared acknowledgement of grief created an unexpected bridge between them, a recognition of common experience that transcended professional boundaries. Their conversation shifted to safer territory as they ate security philosophies, industry developments, changes they'd witnessed over their long careers. Eleanor discovered that beneath Richard's forbidding exterior lay a sharp, occasionally dry wit, and a perspective that often aligned with her own. You mentioned Vietnam earlier, she noted as they finished their main course. I saw the photograph in your office. Richard nodded, his expression neutral but not closed. 2 tours, 71 to 73. Not something I discuss often. My father was there in '68, 25th Infantry Division. Something in Richard's posture shifted, a subtle recognition passing between them. I was 9th Infantry. We probably walked some of the same ground. Eleanor thought of her father, his nightmares, his long silences, the way he'd flinched at sudden noises until the day he died. He never really came all the way home, she said quietly. None of us did, Richard acknowledged, his voice equally soft. Different war than today's. No welcome home parades for us. Is that why you went into security work, protecting what you'd fought for? Richard considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Partly, after discharge, I found civilian life inadequately structured, security work provided purpose, clear objectives, and Ironclad grew from there. Over time, the early years were lean. Margaret was a high school music teacher. Her salary kept us afloat while I built the company. She never doubted it would succeed, even when I did. The mention of his wife brought a different quality to his voice, warmth mingled with old pain. Eleanor recognized the tone. She heard it in her own voice when speaking of Michael. "She sounds remarkable," Eleanor offered. "She was—" Richard's gaze drifted momentarily, seeing something beyond the restaurant. "The plane crash was 12 years ago. Munich to London. Mechanical failure. They said, 'I'm sorry.'" The words were inadequate, but Eleanor knew from experience that acknowledgement mattered more than eloquence. "And your husband?" Richard asked, his tone gentle despite the directness of the question. "Pancreatic cancer. 7 years ago. By the time they diagnosed it," she left the sentence unfinished, knowing he would understand. "Too fast to prepare, too slow to be merciful," Richard supplied, articulating exactly what she'd felt during those final, terrible months. "Yes." Eleanor took a sip of wine, allowing the moment of shared understanding to settle between them. "It's strange, isn't it, how life divides into before and after, and how impossible it is to explain that to anyone who hasn't experienced it." Their eyes met across the table, recognition flowing between them, not romantic interest, but something perhaps more valuable, the relief of being understood without explanation. The moment was interrupted by Richard's phone vibrating with an incoming call. He checked the display, his expression immediately shifting back to professional alertness. "Blackwood," he answered, listening intently for several moments. "Lock down the system. We'll be there in 15 minutes. He ended the call, already signaling for the check. "There's been another breach attempt, different approach, but Lisa thinks it's related to yesterday's attack." Eleanor was already gathering her things, professional focus returning instantly. "Do they have a trace?" "Partial. The attempt was blocked, but they managed to capture more of the signature." As they hurried back to Ironclad headquarters, Eleanor reflected on the evening's unexpected developments. They had begun the day as reluctant collaborators, wary of each other's methods and motives. They would end it as what, not quite friends, perhaps, but something beyond mere professional associates. For two people who had spent decades building walls around their personal lives, even this small shift represented significant territory. Whether it would help or hinder their investigation remained to be seen. 3 days of intensive work transformed Eleanor from outsider to grudgingly accepted ally at Ironclad. The breakthrough came on Wednesday afternoon, when her specialized tracing algorithm identified a pattern in the attack attempts that Lisa Chen's team had missed. "The intrusions aren't just testing defenses," Eleanor explained to the assembled team. "They're mapping response patterns. Each attempt is slightly different, designed to trigger specific security protocols so they can catalog how the system reacts." Richard leaned forward, studying the pattern analysis she displayed. "They're creating a playbook for our defensive strategies." "Exactly. And once they have a complete profile, they can design an attack that anticipates and counters every standard response," Lisa finished, the implications dawning on her face. "We need to change the game." Richard decided, his strategic mind immediately shifting to countermeasures. "Deploy non-standard protocols, irregular response patterns." "That buys us time," Eleanor agreed, "but we need to trace these attacks to their source if we want to end the threat permanently." The next 72 hours became a blur of activity. Eleanor practically lived at Ironclad, catching brief naps on the office couch between analysis sessions. She worked primarily with Lisa Chen's team, but increasingly found herself in strategy discussions with Richard, their complementary approaches creating a synergy neither had anticipated. By Saturday evening, they had implemented a comprehensive defense system incorporating Eleanor's adaptive algorithms and Ironclad's robust infrastructure. The immediate threat appeared contained, though all recognized it was merely a temporary reprieve. You should go home. Get some real sleep, Richard advised, finding Eleanor still at her workstation well past midnight. The office was nearly empty, most staff having departed hours earlier. She looked up, blinking away the screen fatigue that even her computer glasses couldn't entirely prevent. I could say the same to you. I live 10 minutes away. You're in a hotel across town? I'm fine. I want to finish this analysis of the command pathways. Richard studied her for a moment, then made an unexpected offer. I have a better idea. My house has a fully equipped guest room, and I was about to make dinner anyway. You can continue your analysis there after you've eaten something that didn't come from a vending machine. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. You cook? A hint of amusement crossed his face. Is that so surprising? Honestly, yes. I had you pegged as someone with a personal chef or a drawer full of takeout menus. Margaret insisted I learn to cook after we got married. Said no partner of hers was going to be helpless in the kitchen. His expression softened at the memory. Turns out I have a knack for it. Eleanor considered the offer. The hotel room was sterile and anonymous, its only virtue being proximity to Ironclad. The prospect of a home-cooked meal and workspace that didn't smell of industrial carpet cleaner was admittedly appealing. All right, she agreed, gathering her laptop. But I'm bringing my work. We're not quite at the relax and watch a movie stage of this crisis. Perish the thought, Richard replied dryly. His home surprised her. Eleanor had expected something sleek and modern, perhaps a luxury penthouse with impersonal designer furnishings. Instead, Richard lived in a gracious Georgetown townhouse filled with character-original hardwood floors, built-in bookshelves, and furniture that spoke of comfort rather than showroom perfection. This isn't what I imagined, she admitted as he gave her a brief tour. What did you imagine, a steel bunker with retinal scanners? Something like that. This is actually a home. Richard led her to the kitchen, a warm space with professional-grade appliances and well-used cookware. Margaret chose this house, said if I was going to work like a machine, at least I should live somewhere that reminded me I was human. He moved with easy confidence around the kitchen, assembling ingredients for what appeared to be a substantial pasta dish. Eleanor perched on a stool at the island counter, oddly content to watch this unexpected domestic side of a man she'd initially categorized as all business. Wine, he offered, gesturing to an open bottle of Cabernet breathing on the counter. Please. She accepted the glass he poured, taking an appreciative sip. You have good taste. Margaret did. I've just maintained her standards. He began dicing onions and garlic with practiced efficiency. The guest room is through that hallway. First door on the right. Make yourself comfortable while I finish this. Eleanor took the opportunity to explore the guest room, which proved as thoughtfully appointed as the rest of the house. She freshened up in the adjoining bathroom, grateful for the chance to wash away some of the staleness of too many hours in the office. When she returned to the kitchen, Richard was stirring a fragrant sauce that made her suddenly aware of how long it had been since she'd eaten a proper meal. It smells amazing, she acknowledged, resuming her seat at the counter. Penne arrabbiata, simple but effective, like all good security systems. He offered her a small smile, and Eleanor found herself returning it without hesitation. They ate at the kitchen island, continuing their discussion of the investigation between bites of perfectly prepared pasta. The professional focus remained, yet something had shifted in their interaction, a comfort level that hadn't existed before. We need to track the attacks to their source, Eleanor said, accepting a second serving. These defensive measures won't hold forever. Agreed, but we need more than a digital trail. These people are too careful. Richard refilled their wine glasses. We need human intelligence. Global tech seems the obvious starting point, given Victor's position there. Richard nodded thoughtfully. I have contacts who might be able to provide information about their current projects. Discreetly, of course. Of course, Eleanor echoed with a hint of amusement. I imagine discreet is your default setting. He acknowledged this with a slight incline of his head. In my experience, people who broadcast their intentions rarely achieve them. After dinner, They moved to Richard's home office, a comfortable room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk with multiple monitors. Eleanor set up her laptop on the conference table, while Richard checked in with Ironclad's night security team. Working in this more relaxed environment, Eleanor found her mind making connections that had eluded her in the office. By midnight, she had identified a potential pattern in the attack chronology that might help predict the next attempt. "Richard," she called, interrupting his own analysis. "Look at this timeline. The attacks are accelerating according to a specific progression." He moved to stand behind her chair, leaning down to study her screen. His proximity should have felt intrusive. Instead, Eleanor found it oddly comfortable. "They're building towards something," he observed, tracing the pattern with his finger. "Each attack closer to the last. If this holds, we can expect the next major attempt within 48 hours. Richard straightened, his expression grave. "We need to be ready." He checked his watch. "But not at the expense of clear thinking. It's after 1 in the morning. We both need rest." Eleanor reluctantly acknowledged the wisdom of this. Fatigue-impaired judgment could cost them dearly at this critical juncture. As she prepared for bed in the guest room, Eleanor reflected on the unexpected turn her assignment had taken. She had arrived expecting to tolerate Richard Blackwood as a necessary ally in the investigation. Instead, she found herself genuinely respecting him, not just professionally, but personally. It was a disorienting realization for someone who had kept emotional distance from colleagues for decades. Even more unsettling was the awareness that Richard seemed to understand her in ways few people ever had, the dedication that others mistook for obsession, the drive that came from having already lost what mattered most. Eleanor dismissed these thoughts as she settled into the surprisingly comfortable guest bed. Professional appreciation, nothing more. They were colleagues united by a common purpose, and perhaps the shared experience of loss. Anything beyond that was neither relevant nor productive to contemplate. Yet as sleep claimed her, Eleanor found herself wondering what Richard Blackwood had been like before. Grief and responsibility had etched such deep lines into his face, and whether, like her, he sometimes longed for someone who truly understood the weight he carried. The predicted attack came sooner than expected. Eleanor's phone jolted her awake at 5:17 a.m. with an urgent alert from her monitoring system. She was already pulling on yesterday's clothes when a knock came at her door. "Eleanor," Richard called, his voice tense. "We've got a breach in progress." She opened the door to find him fully dressed, expression grim. "I just got the alert. My system at Ironclad." "No, the Pentagon's internal network. They're going after the missile defense system directly." They were in Richard's car within minutes, speeding toward Ironclad headquarters through Washington's pre-dawn emptiness. Eleanor was already on her secure line to Deputy Director Landry. "We're tracking it now. Marcus, this is more sophisticated than previous attempts. They're using a distributed approach, multiple entry points simultaneously. The Pentagon's cyber team is engaging," Landry reported, "but they're struggling to contain it. We need your specialized knowledge." "We're 10 minutes out from my systems," Eleanor assured him. "Have they breached the command protocols yet?" "Negative, but they're getting closer. The attack pattern keeps adapting to our countermeasures." Eleanor met Richard's gaze briefly. "That's my Demeter architecture at work. It learns from each defense it encounters." Richard pressed the accelerator harder, weaving through early morning traffic with military precision. "Can you counter it? I wrote the original system. I know its weaknesses." Eleanor was already opening her laptop, establishing a secure connection to Ironclad servers. "But this version has been significantly enhanced. It's going to be like chess against a version of myself that's had 15 years to study my strategies." The Ironclad building was already humming with emergency activity when they arrived. Lisa Chen met them at the elevator, tablet in hand. "The attack is targeting 3 separate access points to the missile defense network," she reported as they strode toward the command center. "Standard countermeasures are failing. It's like the system anticipates every response." "Because it does," Eleanor confirmed grimly. "Show me what you've got." For the next hour, Eleanor led a desperate digital defense, directing Ironclad's team while simultaneously developing counter-algorithms to her own creation. Richard coordinated with Pentagon officials, ensuring they implemented Eleanor's strategies across all affected systems. "They're retreating," Lisa finally announced, exhaustion evident in her voice. "Attack vectors are going dark one by one." Eleanor didn't relax. "They're not retreating. They're reassessing." She studied the data flowing across her screens. This was a serious attempt, but still a test. They're gauging how we respond under pressure. "And learning from each engagement," Richard added, understanding immediately. "We need to take the offensive, find their source before they launch a full-scale attack." Eleanor nodded, already formulating a plan. "I've been tracking their command protocols. There's a distinctive pattern to the encryption that might help us trace it back to the source." "What do you need?" "Access to NSA tracking systems would help." Richard made a call, speaking briefly with someone who clearly held significant authority. When he ended the call, he turned to Eleanor. "You'll have temporary access through our secure channel. Officially, this never happened." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "You have that kind of pull with the NSA. Let's just say I've done them favors they'd prefer not to document." With NSA resources supplementing Ironclad's capabilities, Eleanor established a sophisticated trace program designed to follow the attacker's digital trail back through their elaborate protective measures. It was painstaking work, requiring constant adjustments as their quarry deployed countermeasures. By mid-afternoon, they had a preliminary location, a server farm in Seattle, operating under a shell company with suspicious financial connections. "Seattle," Richard mused, studying the information. "Convenient." "Why convenient?" Eleanor asked. "Because we need to follow this lead in person, and my daughter Rebecca lives in Seattle. She's been pestering me to visit." Eleanor caught his implication immediately. "A plausible cover for our investigation." "Precisely. Two old colleagues catching up, visiting family while we're in town." "Shara, your daughter won't find it suspicious that you're suddenly appearing with a woman she's never met?" Richard's expression suggested this hadn't occurred to him. "Rebecca doesn't concern herself with my personal life. She'll be too pleased I'm taking time away from the office to question the circumstances." "And what about your son? Won't he find it odd that you're leaving during a security crisis?" "Thomas can manage Ironclad temporarily. He's been ready for more responsibility." Richard studied her face. "Unless you have objections to this approach." Eleanor considered it from all angles. "No, it's logical. A direct federal investigation would alert our targets. Two private citizens traveling to Seattle wouldn't trigger the same alarms." "Good, I'll make the arrangements." Richard paused. "And you might want to call your daughter, since we'll be in her city." Eleanor felt a flash of surprise that he'd remembered this detail from their earlier conversation. "Yes, I suppose I should." As Richard left to coordinate with Thomas about managing Ironclad in his absence, Eleanor found herself contemplating this unexpected development. A week ago, she'd been a solitary consultant in her Boston apartment. Now she was preparing to travel across the country with a man she'd initially regarded with professional wariness, but was increasingly coming to respect and perhaps even like. Life had certainly taken an unexpected turn. But then, in Eleanor's experience, the most significant investigations often did. The Seattle rain created a glistening patina on the airport tarmac as their plane touched down. Eleanor had spent most of the flight reviewing data, occasionally consulting with Richard about their approach to investigating the server facility. "We'll need physical access," she'd explained, showing him architectural plans they'd obtained through Richard's connections. "The most valuable servers will be air-gapped for security, no external network connections." "I can handle the physical security measures," Richard had assured her. "Military experience has its advantages." Now, as they collected their luggage, the investigative partnership shifted to their established cover story, old colleagues reconnecting while visiting their respective children in Seattle. "Rebecca's meeting us for dinner at 7, Richard informed her as they approached the rental car counter. "I hope that's acceptable." "Of course," Eleanor replied. though she felt a flicker of uncertainty. Meeting Richard's daughter represented a crossing of boundaries professional into personal that she hadn't anticipated. She's quite different from Thomas, Richard continued as they walked to their mid-size SUV. Artist, musician, took after her mother. My daughter's a trauma surgeon, Eleanor offered. Precision under pressure, I suppose she took after me in some ways. Richard smiled slightly as he loaded their bags. Our children reflect us, whether we intend it or not. The drive to their hotel passed through Seattle's vibrant neighborhoods, the Space Needle occasionally visible through gaps in the skyline. They had booked adjacent rooms at a business-class hotel downtown close enough for convenience, but maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. After settling in, Eleanor called her daughter. Mom, Sophia answered, surprise evident in her voice. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, Eleanor assured her. I'm actually in Seattle for a consulting project. I thought we might have dinner while I'm here. You're in Seattle. Sophia's tone shifted from concern to delight. That's fantastic. How long are you staying? Just a few days. I'm working with a colleague on a security matter. Bring your colleague along. I'd love to meet someone who actually works with my mysterious mother. Eleanor hesitated. I'm not sure that would be appropriate. It's a professional relationship. All the more reason. Tomorrow night, Joe and I could make reservations at that Italian place you liked last time. Recognizing defeat, Eleanor agreed to the arrangement. After ending the call, she sat on the edge of the hotel bed, contemplating the increasingly blurred line between her professional and personal life. In just 1 week, Richard Blackwood had somehow moved from reluctant collaborator to someone who would soon be meeting her daughter and son-in-law. A text message interrupted her thoughts. Lobby in 30 minutes for dinner with Rebecca. Eleanor replied with a simple affirmative, then changed into more casual attire, dark jeans, a sapphire blue cashmere sweater, and comfortable boots suitable for Seattle's damp climate. She applied minimal makeup and released her silver-streaked hair from its practical bun, allowing it to fall in soft waves to her shoulders. When she met Richard in the lobby, she noticed he too had shed his corporate armor. Instead of his usual impeccable suit, he wore charcoal slacks and a forest green sweater that somehow softened his military bearing without diminishing his natural authority. You look, he began, then seemed to reconsider whatever he had been about to say. Different, outside the office setting. As do you, she replied, oddly pleased by his momentary hesitation. The restaurant Rebecca had chosen was a trendy farm-to-table establishment in Capitol Hill, its warm lighting and exposed brick creating an atmosphere both sophisticated and welcoming. Rebecca was already seated when they arrived, rising to embrace her father with genuine warmth. Eleanor observed their interaction with professional interest. Rebecca Blackwood was striking rather than conventionally beautiful, tall like her father, with artist's hands and intelligent eyes that assessed Eleanor with undisguised curiosity. So you're the security consultant Dad's been working with, Rebecca said after introductions had been made. He actually mentioned you on the phone, which is unprecedented. Dad never discusses work colleagues. Rebecca, Richard admonished mildly. What it's true, she turned back to Eleanor. So what's it like working with the legendary Richard Blackwood? Is he as impossibly demanding with consultants as he is with his executive team? Eleanor found herself warming to Rebecca's direct approach. Your father has high standards. Fortunately, so do I. Rebecca laughed, a rich sound that transformed her serious face. I like her. Dad. Throughout dinner, Eleanor observed the complex dynamics between father and daughter, obvious affection tempered by old tensions neither seemed willing to directly address. Rebecca was clearly protective of her father while simultaneously challenging his reserved nature at every opportunity. Dad never told you how I almost gave him a heart attack by dropping out of law school to become a musician. Did he? Rebecca asked as they enjoyed excellent Pacific Northwest salmon. I believe that detail was omitted from our professional discussions. Eleanor replied with a smile. 3 years at Stanford Law, and I walk away 6 months before graduation to join a jazz quartet. Rebecca's expression grew more serious. Mom would have understood immediately. She was a music teacher. After all, Dad took longer to come around. I always supported your choices, Richard countered, though his tone suggested this was an old, well-worn disagreement. Supporting and understanding are different things, Rebecca replied without heat. But you've gotten better. She turned to Eleanor. He even came to my show last year. Sat through 3 hours of experimental jazz without checking his phone once. A significant achievement for any parent, Eleanor acknowledged, thinking of the medical conferences she'd attended to support Sophia. My daughter sometimes invites me to observe trauma surgeries. I believe it's her way of ensuring I understand the importance of her work. Does it help? Rebecca asked. Understanding her world better. Eleanor considered this thoughtfully. Yes, though it doesn't necessarily make it easier to watch your child navigate difficult situations, even when they're supremely capable. Richard's gaze met hers briefly across the table, a moment of shared parental understanding that transcended their professional relationship. As dinner progressed, conversation flowed more naturally than Eleanor had anticipated. Rebecca proved to be not only musically talented, but widely read and politically engaged. Her perspective on current events reflected both her father's analytical mind and a creative sensibility that was entirely her own. Will you be attending Dad's security conference tomorrow? Rebecca asked as they finished dessert. Eleanor glanced at Richard, momentarily confused. The Cybersecurity Symposium at the Convention Center, he supplied smoothly. Our cover for being in Seattle. Ah, yes. Eleanor recovered quickly. Though we may need to step out for other meetings, Rebecca's gaze shifted between them, a hint of something suspicious amusement in her expression. Right. The security conference. Very important, I'm sure. After dinner, as they walked Rebecca to her car, she hugged her father again, then surprised Eleanor by embracing her as well. It was wonderful meeting you, Eleanor, she said warmly. Anyone who can get my father to leave his fortress of solitude for more than 6 hours deserves my eternal gratitude. After Rebecca departed, Richard and Eleanor walked back toward their hotel through Seattle's light evening drizzle, sharing an umbrella he produced from his jacket pocket. Your daughter is remarkable, Eleanor observed. You should be proud. I am, though I haven't always shown it effectively. Richard's expression held the particular regret of parents who recognize their mistakes only in retrospect. Margaret was better at the emotional aspects of parenting. After she died, I struggled with Rebecca. Thomas was easier, he understood the business, shared my priorities. But Rebecca needed something different from you. Yes, something I wasn't equipped to provide. He glanced at her. You seem to have a good relationship with your daughter. Now, yes, after Michael died, there were difficult years. Sophia wanted me to lean on her for support. I was determined to show her I was fine on my own. Were you fine? The direct question might have seemed intrusive from anyone else. From Richard, who had walked the same path of loss, it felt like genuine concern rather than prying. No, Eleanor admitted quietly, but admitting that felt like failure at the time. They walked in companionable silence for several moments, the shared umbrella creating a small private space within the bustling city streets. I've arranged for us to tour the server facility tomorrow morning, Richard finally said, returning to their professional purpose. Officially as potential clients interested in their security infrastructure? Good. I'll need about 10 minutes of unmonitored access to their main server room. You'll have it. His confidence was not bravado, but the calm certainty of someone who had handled more difficult tactical challenges. As they reached the hotel, Eleanor found herself reluctant to end the evening. Their dinner with Rebecca had shifted something between them, humanizing a relationship that had been primarily professional despite moments of personal connection. Nightcap in the lobby bar, Richard suggested, seemingly sharing her hesitation to retreat to their separate rooms. I'd like that, Eleanor agreed. The bar was quiet, business travelers tapping on laptops or having subdued conversations over cocktails. They found a corner table that offered both privacy and a view of the entrance, a security professional's habitual preference. Richard ordered a Macallan 18, Eleanor a gin martini. When their drinks arrived, he raised his glass slightly. To unexpected alliances, he offered, and to children who keep us honest, she added, touching her glass to his. They sipped their drinks in comfortable silence for a moment before Richard spoke again. Tomorrow could be dangerous, he said quietly. If the server facility is connected to the attacks, they'll have significant security measures, both digital and physical. I'm aware of the risks. Eleanor met his concerned gaze directly. I spent 20 years in the field with the FBI before moving to consulting. I can handle myself. I don't doubt your capabilities. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. I feel responsible for bringing you into this situation. You didn't bring me in, Richard. The Pentagon did, and I would have pursued this investigation regardless, given the connection to my stolen work. He nodded, acknowledging the truth of this. Still, we should establish contingency plans. If we're separated or if something goes wrong. They spent the next half hour outlining backup protocols and emergency contacts, the professional focus returning even as the setting remained casual. By the time they finished their drinks, they had a comprehensive strategy for the next day's operation. As they rode the elevator to their floor, Eleanor found herself studying Richard's profile, the strong jawline now softened slightly by age, the lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he had smiled more frequently in younger days. Thank you for dinner with Rebecca, she said as they reached their adjacent rooms. It was unexpectedly enjoyable. She liked you, Richard replied, a hint of surprise in his tone. She doesn't warm to people easily. Something else she inherited from me, I suppose. The ability to recognize trustworthy allies is a valuable trait, Eleanor observed. One I believe we share. Their eyes met briefly, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. Then Richard nodded once, his expression returning to its usual composed professionalism. 700 tomorrow. We should be rested. Agreed. Good night. Richard. Good night. Eleanor. As she entered her room, Eleanor found herself wondering what Rebecca had seen when observing them together at dinner. Had the younger woman detected the gradual shift occurring between her father and Eleanor, the evolution from reluctant colleagues to something not yet defined, but increasingly significant? More importantly, what did Eleanor herself want that relationship to become? It was a question she wasn't quite ready to answer as she prepared for bed, setting these personal considerations aside to focus on tomorrow's mission. The investigation came first. All else was secondary, no matter how intriguing the possibilities might be. The server facility occupied an unremarkable commercial building in South Seattle, its mundane exterior belying the sophisticated operation within, posing as potential clients. Richard and Eleanor were greeted by an overly enthusiastic sales manager named Bryce, eager to showcase their industry-leading security protocols. Our physical security includes biometric access controls, 24/7 armed personnel, and a proprietary intrusion detection system, Bryce explained as he led them through the initial security checkpoint. And our digital safeguards exceed military specifications. Eleanor played her role perfectly, the technically knowledgeable but not exceptional security consultant, asking appropriate questions without revealing her true expertise. Richard presented himself as the decision-maker, occasionally interrupting with pointed questions about redundancy and disaster recovery. We'd particularly like to see your air-gap storage solutions, Richard mentioned casually as they completed the general tour. Our client handles extremely sensitive financial data. Of course, Mr. Blackwood, our secure server room is this way, though we do limit access for security reasons. Understandable, Eleanor interjected smoothly. Perhaps I could review your network architecture diagrams while Mr. Blackwood examines the physical infrastructure. I'm particularly interested in your VLAN segregation approach. The diversion worked beautifully. While Bryce escorted Richard to the secure server room, another staff member took Eleanor to a technical office to review network documentation. Once alone, she quickly planted a small device disguised as a network adapter that would allow her remote access to their internal systems. 20 minutes later, they reconvened in the lobby, having each accomplished their objectives without raising suspicion. Very impressive operation, Richard commented as they prepared to leave. We'll be in touch after consulting with our client. Just one more question, Eleanor added, her tone casual, though her intent was anything but. Do you provide services to global tech industries? They were recommended as a reference, but we'd like to avoid any potential conflicts of interest. Bryce hesitated just long enough to confirm her suspicion. I'm not personally familiar with all our clients, but I can check that for you. No need, Richard intervened smoothly. We can follow up on that separately. In the car, Eleanor immediately pulled out her secure tablet. They're definitely connected to global tech. His reaction confirmed it. Agreed. And I spotted at least 3 servers in their secure room with non-standard configurations. They claimed they were for a government client, but the setup was inconsistent with federal protocols. Eleanor activated the remote access device she'd planted, her fingers flying across the screen as she navigated through the facility's internal network. I'm in. Let me see if I can locate those servers in their system inventory. For the next hour, they worked from a nearby coffee shop, Eleanor mining the facility's network while Richard coordinated with Ironclad's team back in Washington. The deeper Eleanor dug, the more certain she became that they'd found a critical piece of the puzzle. These servers are running modified versions of my Demeter architecture, she confirmed, showing Richard the technical specifications she'd uncovered. They're being used as command and control systems for the attacks we've been tracking. Can you determine who's accessing them? Working on it. The access logs are heavily encrypted, but... She paused, a flash of recognition crossing her face. Wait, this encryption method, I know it. Victor's, Richard guessed. No, it's Evelyn Grant's. Eleanor sat back, momentarily stunned. She was Victor's research assistant 15 years ago, before he disappeared with my work. Brilliant mathematician. She specialized in cryptography. Grant, Richard repeated, the name triggering a connection. Evelyn Grant is currently Deputy Director of National Security at the Department of Defense. Eleanor's blood ran cold, which would give her access to every system we're trying to protect. And legitimate reasons to be examining the missile defense architecture. We need to find solid proof before making accusations against someone at that level. Eleanor cautioned. This could destroy both our careers if we're wrong. Richard nodded grimly. And possibly end our lives if we're right. People don't reach that position without accumulating significant power and resources. They agreed to continue their investigation discreetly, Eleanor working to decrypt the access logs while Richard leveraged his military connections to gather intelligence on Evelyn Grant's recent activities. By late afternoon, they had established enough concerning patterns to warrant bringing Deputy Director Landry into their confidence, though carefully, through secure channels that bypassed normal Pentagon communications. Meet me at the safe house, was Landry's terse response after hearing their preliminary findings. 2100 hours. Come alone and make sure you're not followed. Eleanor and Richard exchanged a glance, both recognizing the gravity of Landry's reaction. If the deputy director was activating a safe house protocol, he believed their communication channels might be compromised. We need to cancel dinner with your daughter and son-in-law, Richard pointed out as they headed back to the hotel to prepare for the evening meeting. Eleanor nodded, disappointed but unsurprised. Occupational hazard. Sophia's used to last-minute cancellations. As she made the call, apologizing to her clearly disappointed daughter, Eleanor was struck by the parallels between her life and Richard's. Both had sacrificed normal family relationships for careers dedicated to protection and security. Both had children who had learned to accept the limitations this imposed. Back at the hotel, they prepared for the evening meeting with the focused efficiency of experienced field operatives. Eleanor changed into darker clothing suitable for inconspicuous movement, while Richard checked and rechecked the secure phone they would use to contact Ironclad in an emergency. We should approach separately, he suggested as they finalized their plan. I'll take a taxi, you take the rental car. If anything seems off when you arrive, drive past without stopping. Eleanor nodded, appreciating his thoroughness. Same for you. If I'm not there within 15 minutes of your arrival, assume compromise and contact Thomas with the contingency code. As she gathered her equipment, Eleanor caught Richard watching her with an unreadable expression. "What is it?" she asked. "Just—" He hesitated, then continued with uncharacteristic uncertainty. "Be careful tonight, Eleanor. This situation has escalated beyond what either of us anticipated." The genuine concern in his voice touched her unexpectedly. "I'm always careful. Richard, professional habit." "I know. Still," he met her gaze directly. "I've come to value our partnership. I wouldn't want to lose it prematurely." The simple statement carried weight beyond its literal meaning, an acknowledgement of the connection that had formed between them over the past intense week. "Likewise," Eleanor replied softly. "So you be careful too." They parted in the hotel lobby, Richard heading for the taxi stand while Eleanor walked to the parking garage. The evening ahead would test their investigative skills, their judgment, and possibly their physical capabilities if things went wrong. But for the first time in years, Eleanor realized she wasn't facing such challenges alone. Having Richard Blackwood as an ally and perhaps something more made the prospect less daunting than it might otherwise have been. The safe house awaited, and with it, answers that could change everything. The safe house was located in an unremarkable residential neighborhood north of Seattle, a modest bungalow with well-maintained landscaping that blended perfectly with its surroundings. Eleanor drove past once, confirming the address while checking for surveillance, before parking 2 blocks away and approaching on foot. Richard was already there when she arrived, seated in a Spartan living room with Marcus Landry. The deputy director looked more haggard than when Eleanor had last seen him at the Pentagon, his normally impeccable appearance showing signs of strain. "Secure the door," Landry instructed as Eleanor entered. "Then we can talk." Once the house was secured, Landry activated a small electronic device that emitted a low hum, a counter-surveillance measure that would prevent electronic eavesdropping. "What I'm about to share is classified at the highest level," he began without preamble. "If Evelyn Grant is involved as you suspect, we're dealing with a national security threat unlike anything since the Cold War." "You believe our assessment?" Richard asked, clearly surprised by Landry's immediate acceptance of their theory. "I've had my own suspicions about Grant for months," Landry admitted. "Nothing concrete enough to act on. She's too careful, too well connected. But there have been anomalies in information flow, decisions that didn't align with stated intelligence." Eleanor leaned forward. "Why didn't you say something when you brought us in?" "Because I couldn't be certain who to trust." Landry's expression was grim. "Grant has allies throughout the intelligence community. If I'd voiced suspicions without proof, I'd have been sidelined immediately, possibly permanently." "So you used us as independent investigators," Richard concluded, his tone neutral but his posture tense. "Outside the official channels she could monitor." "Yes." Landry didn't attempt to soften the admission. "And you found more in a week than my internal inquiries managed in 6 months." Eleanor processed this new information, professional instincts overriding any personal reaction to being used as an unwitting pawn. What's her objective? The attacks we've traced show pattern mapping of defense systems. But to what end? Landry's expression darkened further. 2 months ago, I discovered Grant had special access to Project Lighthouse, a classified AI-driven missile defense system being developed to replace our aging infrastructure. "I'm familiar with it," Richard said. "Ironclad submitted a security bid last year, but was denied. Unusual, given our track record." "Because Grant ensured the contract went to Global Tech," Landry confirmed. "If she's compromised the current system while simultaneously controlling development of its replacement, she could create backdoors in both," Eleanor finished, the implications chilling. "But why financial gain, foreign influence?" "Neither, I suspect." Landry handed them each a file folder. "This is everything I've compiled on Grant's activities over the past decade. The pattern suggests something more personal." Eleanor opened the folder, scanning its contents with practiced efficiency. What emerged was a troubling portrait. Evelyn Grant had systematically positioned herself at the intersection of national security and technological development, accumulating extraordinary influence while maintaining a deliberately low public profile. "There's a connection here we're missing," she murmured, studying the timeline Landry had assembled. "Something that would explain why she's targeting these specific systems now." Richard, reviewing his own copy of the file, suddenly went still. "The Hughes incident," he said quietly. Landry's head snapped up. "You know about that? I was tangentially involved. Army intelligence. 1994. Richard's expression had grown distant. "Classified operation that went wrong. 3 agents killed when their cover was compromised." "What does that have to do with Grant?" Eleanor asked. "Because one of those agents was her husband." Landry revealed, "Michael Grant died in that operation, reportedly due to intelligence failures within our own agencies." Eleanor felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. She blames the system for his death. This isn't about money or ideology. It's about revenge. "A revenge plot 29 years in the making?" Richard questioned, though his tone suggested he found the theory plausible. "That's extraordinary dedication to a cause." "Or extraordinary hatred," Landry countered. "The kind that consumes everything else." The three fell silent, contemplating the enormity of what they were suggesting, that one of America's highest-ranking security officials was orchestrating a complex attack on the nation's defense infrastructure as personal vengeance for a decades-old tragedy. "We need definitive proof," Eleanor finally said. "Something that directly links Grant to the server facility and the attacks." "I have an idea," Richard offered, "but it's not without risk." His plan was audacious, using Eleanor's remote access to the server facility. They would intentionally trigger a specific alarm that would force an administrative response. When Grant inevitably connected to address the security alert, they could capture her digital signature and establish the connection definitively. "It's essentially a controlled counterattack," Eleanor elaborated. "But if she detects our presence, we lose the element of surprise and potentially our only chance to stop her." "Do it," Landry authorized after brief consideration. "We may not get another opportunity." For the next hour, Eleanor worked intently, preparing the digital equivalent of a tripwire, while Richard coordinated with a trusted team at Ironclad to establish secure monitoring channels. The concentrated silence was broken only by the occasional technical exchange or clarifying question. "Ready," Eleanor announced finally. "Once I execute this command, we'll have approximately 3 minutes before she receives the alert. Assuming she follows expected protocols, she'll initiate a secure connection to the server within 5 minutes after that." "And if she doesn't follow protocols," Landry asked, "then we'll know she suspects a trap." Richard replied, "In which case, we'll need to move to contingency planning immediately." Eleanor took a deep breath, fingers poised over the keyboard. "Executing now." The command sequence launched, creating a carefully crafted security anomaly in the server facility's monitoring system, significant enough to require senior authorization, but not so alarming as to trigger an emergency shutdown. The next 8 minutes passed with excruciating slowness, the three of them watching Eleanor's monitoring program for any sign of administrative access. Just as tension began to mount unbearably, the screen displayed an alert: "Administrative connection initiated." "She's in," Eleanor whispered, fingers flying as she deployed the trace program. "Tracking connection pathway now." The program worked silently, following the administrative connection back through multiple relay points and security screens. For a moment, it seemed they might lose the trail as the connection bounced through several international servers, but then the final trace completed. "Got it," Eleanor announced, a fierce satisfaction in her voice. The connection originated from a DoD secure terminal registered to Evelyn Grant. "That's still not definitive," Richard cautioned. "She could claim someone used her credentials." "But this is," Eleanor countered, displaying another screen of data. "The connection signature includes biometric verification markers, fingerprint and retinal scan. Only Grant herself could have initiated this session." Landry studied the evidence, his expression hardening with resolved determination. It's enough to take to the director. We need to move quickly before she realizes we've identified her. As they prepared to leave the safe house, a soft alert sounded from Eleanor's monitoring program. She turned back to the screen, her triumphant expression fading to concern. She's initiated a secondary protocol in the server, Eleanor reported, quickly analyzing the command sequences. I don't recognize this pattern. Richard moved to her side, studying the data over her shoulder. Could it be a standard security response? No, this is something else. Something... Eleanor trailed off as recognition dawned. She knows. She's implementing a purge protocol. Can you stop it? Landry demanded. I'm trying, but she's locked me out of the primary access channels. Eleanor's fingers worked frantically, attempting to counter Grant's commands. She's not just erasing evidence, she's activating something. An accelerated attack sequence. Richard was already on his secure line to Ironclad. Thomas, full alert status. Implement Protocol Obsidian immediately. Yes, full deployment. Eleanor looked up from her screen, face pale. The server just initiated connection attempts to multiple defense networks simultaneously. This isn't a test run anymore. It's the actual attack. How long do we have? Landry asked, already reaching for his secure phone. Hours, not days. Eleanor estimated grimly. She's accelerated the timeline because she knows we're on to her. We need to get back to C immediately, Landry decided. I'll arrange a military transport. 10 minutes to gather your equipment and meet me at Boeing Field. As they hurriedly packed their gear, Richard moved close to Eleanor, speaking quietly so Landry couldn't overhear. There's something not right about this, he murmured. Grant's too smart to launch prematurely just because we identified her. There's another factor we're missing. Eleanor nodded slightly, having reached the same conclusion. Keep that thought between us for now. Until we know who else might be involved, we trust no one but each other. The significance of that statement, the complete trust it represented, wasn't lost on either of them. In less than 2 weeks, they had moved from reluctant collaboration to absolute faith in each other's judgment and integrity. Always, Richard confirmed, his hand briefly touching hers in a gesture that conveyed more than words could have. 90 minutes later, they were airborne in a military C-37 racing back to Washington, D.C., while remotely coordinating defensive measures with both Ironclad and FBI cybersecurity teams. The plane's secure communication systems allowed them to maintain constant contact, though the 3-hour flight still represented precious time lost. Grant will be anticipating our return, Landry observed as they prepared their strategy. She'll have countermeasures in place, which is why we don't approach her directly, Eleanor responded. We need to secure the evidence first, then approach the director and joint chiefs simultaneously. Agreed, Richard said. Direct confrontation would be tactically unsound given her position and resources. Their planning continued throughout the flight, each contributing their specialized knowledge to create a comprehensive approach that would minimize Grant's ability to maneuver. By the time they began their descent into Andrews Air Force Base, they had established a clear sequence of actions. What they couldn't have anticipated was the scene that awaited them on the tarmac. As the aircraft taxied to a stop, Eleanor noticed an unusual number of military police vehicles positioned near their designated arrival point. When the door opened, they were met not by the expected transport team, but by a full tactical unit led by a stern-faced colonel. Deputy Director Landry, the colonel addressed him formally. I have orders to take you and your companions into custody immediately. Knocking on whose authority? Landry demanded, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. Director Phillips, sir, by special request of the National Security Council. The colonel's discomfort was evident despite his professional demeanor. You're to be held pending investigation of treason charges. This is absurd, Richard interjected sharply. We've uncovered a critical national security threat. We need to brief the Joint Chiefs immediately. I'm sorry, sir. My orders are explicit. The colonel gestured to his team, who moved forward to escort them from the aircraft. Please don't resist. I've been instructed to use whatever force necessary to secure your cooperation. Eleanor caught Richard's eye, a silent communication passing between them. Now was not the time for resistance, they were outnumbered, and direct confrontation would only reinforce the false narrative being constructed against them. "We'll cooperate," she assured the colonel, her mind already calculating alternative approaches. "But I want it on record that we protest this action and demand immediate access to legal counsel." As they were led to separate vehicles, Eleanor maintained her composed exterior while inwardly seething with frustration. Grant had outmaneuvered them, somehow convincing the highest levels of government that they were the threat rather than herself. The tactical mistake had been theirs. They had underestimated both her influence and her willingness to take extreme measures when cornered. Now they would need to find a way to reveal the truth from inside a system that had already judged them guilty. The interrogation room at the Pentagon's secure holding facility was deliberately austere blank walls, metal table bolted to the floor, uncomfortable chairs, and the ever-present camera in the corner. Eleanor had been on the other side of similar rooms during her FBI career, but experiencing it as a detainee was disorienting in its unfamiliarity. She had been separated from Richard and Landry immediately upon arrival, processed through a dehumanizing security procedure, and left alone in this room for what her internal clock suggested was approximately 3 hours. A classic psychological tactic: isolation, to increase anxiety and diminish resistance. When the door finally opened, Eleanor was unsurprised to see Evelyn Grant herself enter, flanked by two stone-faced security officers. At 53, Grant carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to wielding significant power. Her tailored suit and impeccable appearance projected authority, while her assessing gaze revealed the analytical mind that had orchestrated this entire situation. "Ms. Harlow," Grant acknowledged, taking the seat across from her, "I must say, you've created quite the disruption to normal operations." Eleanor met her gaze steadily. "I could say the same about you, Deputy Director." A slight smile touched Grant's lips. "Direct. I appreciate that. It saves us both valuable time." She placed a folder on the table between them. "You've been busy this past week. Seattle, global tech, server facilities. Quite the investigation." "An investigation that led directly to you," Eleanor replied calmly. "We have evidence linking you to the attacks on our defense systems." "Do you?" Grant's expression remained unperturbed. "Because what the director sees is evidence of you and Richard Blackwood attempting to access classified systems without authorization, communicating with unidentified servers, and conspiring with a deputy director who has recently shown concerning judgment. A convenient reframing of legitimate counterintelligence work. Perception shapes reality. Ms. Harlow, you of all people should understand that." Grant leaned forward slightly. "You spent your career building patterns from fragments, creating narratives from disparate elements. I've simply done the same, with the difference that my narratives were true." Grant's smile widened fractionally. "Truth is subjective in our line of work. What matters is what can be proven, and currently, the provable facts favor my interpretation of events." Eleanor studied the woman across from her, recognizing the dangerous combination of brilliant intellect and absolute conviction. This wasn't simply a corrupt official seeking personal gain. This was someone who genuinely believed in the righteousness of her actions. "This is about your husband," Eleanor said quietly. "About Michael." Something flickered in Grant's composed expression, a momentary crack in her armor quickly sealed. "You know nothing about Michael. I know he died in an operation that went wrong. I know the system failed him. And I know you've spent nearly 3 decades positioning yourself to ensure it never happens again by taking control of it yourself." "Simplistic analysis," Grant dismissed, though her tone had hardened. "But what would you know about that kind of loss, about dedicating your life to fixing a broken system?" Eleanor thought of Michael, of the emptiness that had followed his death, of the work that had become both escape and purpose. More than you might imagine. For a moment, an unexpected understanding passed between the two women, both widowed, both driven by loss, both exceptional in fields dominated by men. In different circumstances, they might have recognized each other as kindred spirits. Grant broke the moment first, her professional mask reasserting itself. It doesn't matter. You're in no position to interfere now. The final phase has already begun. Final phase of what? Eleanor pressed. Compromising our missile defense systems. To what end? Revenge won't bring Michael back. This isn't about revenge, Grant corrected sharply. It's about correction. For decades, I've watched from inside as the same structural failures that killed my husband continued unchecked. Bureaucratic inertia, political interference, compartmentalized intelligence, all preventing the system from functioning as it should. So you're what forcing a reset? Eleanor asked, the pieces beginning to align in her mind. Creating a crisis that will necessitate complete restructuring. I'm creating accountability, Grant stated, absolute conviction in her voice. When the vulnerabilities I've exposed become public, there will be no choice but to implement the comprehensive reforms I've spent years developing. The breathtaking scope of Grant's plan began to crystallize for Eleanor, not simple sabotage, but a complex form of institutional manipulation. Grant hadn't gone rogue in the conventional sense. She was attempting to force systemic change through calculated crisis. You're playing with fire, Eleanor warned. The vulnerabilities you're exposing could be exploited by foreign actors before your reforms can be implemented. You're risking national security. Calculated risk, Grant countered. Sometimes the system needs to bend to avoid breaking entirely. And Richard and I, Landry, we're just collateral damage in your grand design. You'll be released once it's done. Exonerated and compensated for the misunderstanding, Grant's tone suggested she genuinely believed this made her actions acceptable. A temporary inconvenience for lasting improvement? Eleanor leaned forward, her voice low and intense. Evelyn, listen to yourself. You're justifying potential catastrophe in the name of improvement. This isn't what Michael would have wanted. For the first time, genuine anger flashed across Grant's features. Don't presume to know what my husband would have wanted. Michael gave his life for a system that abandoned him. I'm ensuring that sacrifice wasn't wasted. She stood abruptly, gathering her folder. You'll remain here until the situation resolves. I suggest you use the time to reconsider your perspective. Perhaps you'll recognize the necessity of my approach once you've seen the results. As Grant moved toward the door, Eleanor made one final attempt. We identified the same problems. Evelyn. The difference is I believe in fixing the system, not forcing it to collapse so you can rebuild it in your image. Grant paused briefly, then left without responding, the security officers following and securing the door behind her. Alone again. Eleanor took a slow, steadying breath. The conversation had confirmed her worst fears while providing critical insights into Grant's mindset and objectives. Now she needed to find a way to communicate this information to Richard, assuming he was being held in the same facility, and develop a counter-strategy. She carefully surveyed the room, considering potential avenues for communication or escape. The camera in the corner would be monitoring her continuously, but perhaps there were other options, ways to exploit the procedural routines of a secure facility. Eleanor settled back in her chair, appearing outwardly resigned while her mind worked through scenarios with methodical precision. Grant might believe she had neutralized the threat they represented, but Eleanor Harlow had not survived 3 decades in security work by accepting defeat when the stakes were highest. Patience had always been among her greatest strengths. Now it would become her most valuable weapon. Richard Blackwood had experienced captivity before. Vietnam had taught him techniques for maintaining mental discipline under isolation and pressure skills he now implemented automatically as he awaited whatever came next. His cell was standard government detention design, a small room with a narrow bed, stainless steel toilet, and no windows. Unlike Eleanor, he hadn't been taken to an interrogation room, suggesting different approaches were being used for each detainee. The door opened with mechanical precision, revealing not Evelyn Grant, as he had expected, but his son Thomas. The shock momentarily disrupted Richard's carefully maintained composure. Thomas, he questioned, instinctively rising from the bed where he'd been seated. "Dad." Thomas entered alone, the door closing behind him. He wore his executive suit, ID badge indicating he had legitimate Pentagon access. "I don't have much time. They think I'm here to try to get information from you." Richard's mind rapidly assessed the situation. "But you're not." "No. I've been working with Landry for months." Thomas kept his voice low, though he would certainly be aware of surveillance. "We suspected Grant, but couldn't prove anything until you and Harlow connected the pieces." "You knew." Richard struggled to process this revelation. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Same reason Landry didn't. We couldn't risk exposure. Grant has people everywhere." Thomas moved closer, speaking near his father's ear. "Listen carefully. In 20 minutes, there will be a security protocol test on this floor. It will create a brief surveillance gap." Richard understood immediately. "How brief?" 90 seconds. Enough time to access the emergency stairwell at the end of the corridor. It will lead you to level B3. Someone will meet you there. "Eleanor, we're working on it. Her location is more closely monitored than yours." Richard's tactical mind was already mapping the escape route, calculating timing and potential obstacles. What about Landry? In custody but secure for now. Grant doesn't dare harm a deputy director without more pretext. Thomas checked his watch. "I need to go. When the lights flicker, that's your signal." As Thomas moved toward the door, Richard called quietly after him. "Son." Thomas paused, looking back. "I'm proud of you," Richard said simply, "for seeing what needed to be done and doing it, regardless of personal risk." Something flickered in Thomas's expression, a moment of genuine emotion breaking through his professional facade. "I learned from the best." Then, with a nod to the guards outside, he was gone, alone again. Richard began preparing methodically. He removed his shoelaces, wrapping one around his wrist under his shirt cuff, a potential tool if needed. He drank water from the small sink, knowing hydration would be important if physical exertion became necessary. Most importantly, he calmed his mind, focusing entirely on the immediate objective while suppressing concern about factors beyond his control. 19 minutes later, the overhead lights flickered briefly, once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Richard moved immediately to the door, positioning himself to the side where he would be less visible from the corridor. The electronic lock disengaged with a soft click. He counted to 3, then eased the door open just enough to scan the corridor. Empty. The security cameras mounted at regular intervals showed no active status lights, the surveillance gap Thomas had promised. Richard moved swiftly but methodically, years of training overriding the natural anxiety of escape. He reached the emergency stairwell without encountering personnel, slipping through the door just as the corridor lights stabilized, indicating the resumption of normal security protocols. The stairwell was dimly lit and utilitarian, concrete steps descending into institutional shadows. Richard moved downward, counting floors, alert for any sound that might indicate pursuit or unexpected presence. Level B3 was marked by a red stripe on the otherwise unmarked door. Richard paused, listening intently before easing it open to peer into the corridor beyond. A solitary figure waited approximately 20 feet away, a woman in a maintenance uniform, her back to him as she apparently worked on an electrical panel. When she turned slightly, Richard felt a surge of surprise and relief. "Rebecca," he whispered, stepping into the corridor. His daughter turned fully, pressing a finger to her lips in the universal signal for silence. She gestured for him to follow, leading him through a service area filled with maintenance equipment and cleaning supplies. "I don't understand," Richard said quietly as they moved. "How are you involved in this? Did you really think I spent 10 years just playing in jazz clubs?" Rebecca replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been with intelligence services since graduate school. My music career is cover." The revelation struck Richard with physical force. His daughter, his artistic, rebellious daughter who had seemingly rejected his structured world, had been operating within that very world all along. "Thomas recruited me initially," she confirmed, leading him through a maze of utility corridors. We needed you to believe the cover completely. Your genuine reactions helped maintain my legend. Richard processed this information with the disciplined compartmentalization that had served him throughout his career. Setting aside the personal implications to focus on the immediate situation, Eleanor Harlow, working on extraction now? Different team. Rebecca stopped at what appeared to be a service elevator, producing a maintenance key. This will take us to the loading dock. Transport is waiting. As they rode the elevator in tense silence, Richard studied his daughter with new eyes. The artistic temperament he'd attributed to her mother's influence now revealed itself as excellent tradecraft, the perfect cover identity for intelligence work. I should have seen it, he said finally. Rebecca's expression softened momentarily. That was the point. Dad, if you couldn't detect it, no one could. The elevator doors opened onto a busy loading area. Delivery personnel moving supplies and equipment with practiced efficiency. Rebecca led him confidently through the controlled chaos, nodding to a security guard who barely glanced at their maintenance uniforms before returning to his clipboard. A nondescript delivery van waited at the far end of the dock, its rear doors opening as they approached. Thomas sat in the driver's seat, while inside, Eleanor, Richard acknowledged with undisguised relief. She looked remarkably composed despite the circumstances, though a bruise was forming along her jawline suggesting her extraction had been less smooth than his own. Glad you could join us, she replied dryly as he climbed into the van. Your children are remarkably resourceful. Apparently so, Richard agreed, settling beside her as Rebecca secured the doors and Thomas navigated the vehicle through the security checkpoint with authorized credentials. Once clear of the Pentagon grounds, Thomas spoke over his shoulder. We need to move quickly. Grant's initiating the final phase of her operation. The missile defense system will be completely compromised within 3 hours. She told me, Eleanor confirmed. It's not simple sabotage. She's engineering a controlled crisis to force implementation of her reform agenda. Reform through catastrophe, Richard summarized grimly. Where are we going? Off-site facility, Rebecca answered. Landry established it outside normal channels. We can operate from there without Grant's knowledge. The facility proved to be an unassuming warehouse in an industrial area of Alexandria. Its exterior suggesting abandoned commercial property, while its interior housed state-of-the-art communications and cyber operations equipment. As they entered, Richard was surprised to see Lisa Chen from Ironclad's security team already at work at one of the monitoring stations. Sir, she acknowledged, glad to see you made it out. Lisa's been our inside person at Ironclad, Thomas explained. We needed technical expertise Grant wouldn't monitor. Richard absorbed this latest revelation with professional detachment, though inwardly he noted the increasing complexity of the operation. How many other trusted colleagues had been part of this counterintelligence effort without his knowledge? Status update, he requested, pushing personal considerations aside to focus on the immediate threat. Lisa brought up a comprehensive display of the missile defense network, certain sections highlighted in alarming red. Grant's compromised approximately 70% of the command architecture. She's inserted a progressive takeover protocol that will give her complete control within 3 hours. To what end? Richard asked. What specifically does she intend to do with that control? Demonstrate vulnerability, Eleanor answered, studying the display. She told me she wants to force accountability through crisis. My guess is she'll temporarily disable key defensive capacities, expose the flaws to Congress and the public, then implement her prepared solutions. Can we stop it? Thomas asked. Not remotely, Lisa replied. The affected systems are now isolated from external access. We'd need direct physical connection to the primary command node. Which is where? Rebecca prompted. The Pentagon's secure server facility, Lisa answered. Level B5, highest security clearance required. Eleanor and Richard exchanged glances, both recognizing the impossible challenge this presented. They had just escaped that very building under extraordinary circumstances. Returning would be exponentially more difficult, particularly as Grant would now be aware of their escape. There might be another way, Eleanor said slowly, her analytical mind working through alternatives. If we can't access the command node directly, perhaps we can use the same vulnerability Grant exploited. Yeah. The Demeter architecture, Richard realized, following her thinking. Your original system, Eleanor nodded. If Grant's using modified Demeter protocols to compromise the defense network, the fundamental architecture remains based on my original design, and every system I ever designed included an emergency override, a failsafe only I would know. Would it still work after 15 years of modifications? Lisa asked skeptically. I don't know, Eleanor admitted, but it's potentially our only option given the time frame and circumstances. What would you need, Thomas asked. Access to a secure terminal connected to the defense network. Not necessarily the command node, but something within the same architecture. Rebecca and Thomas exchanged glances. We might have something, Rebecca said. NSA maintains a secondary monitoring station at Fort Meade, lower security profile than the Pentagon, but connected to the same core systems. How soon can we get there? Richard asked. 30 minutes by helicopter, Thomas replied, which I've already arranged. As they prepared for departure, Eleanor pulled Richard aside briefly. You've raised remarkable children, she observed quietly. Apparently so, he agreed, still processing the revelations about both Thomas and Rebecca. Though I'm beginning to wonder how much I actually know about any aspect of my life. Eleanor smiled slightly. Welcome to my world for the past week. Everything I thought I understood about my work has been systematically challenged since meeting you and your family. Despite the gravity of their situation, Richard found himself returning her smile. At least we're confused together. Strangely comforting, she acknowledged, the warmth in her eyes suggesting she meant it. Their moment of connection was interrupted by Thomas announcing the helicopter's arrival. As they moved toward the roof access, Richard found himself drawing strength from Eleanor's presence beside him, her calm competence and analytical mind providing a steadying influence amidst the disorienting revelations of the day. Whatever came next, they would face it as partners who had come to trust each other implicitly in record time. In Richard's experience, such connections were rare and valuable, particularly when confronting adversaries of Evelyn Grant's caliber. The helicopter awaited, and with it, their final chance to prevent a crisis that could reshape America's defense infrastructure forever. Fort Meade's NSA facility represented one of the most secure installations in the American intelligence architecture, a fact that would have made infiltration nearly impossible under normal circumstances. Fortunately, Rebecca's credentials remained valid, allowing their team access through secondary channels while avoiding main security checkpoints. My cover assignment has been NSA liaison for the past 3 years, she explained as she led them through service corridors. Grant knows I exist, but she's never had reason to connect me to my father or Ironclad. Until now, Richard noted, always considering potential vulnerabilities. True, Rebecca acknowledged, which is why we have approximately 40 minutes before my credentials are flagged for review. The monitoring station she brought them to was compact, but comprehensive, a secondary analysis room used for system integrity verification rather than active intelligence gathering. Most importantly, it provided direct connection to the defense network architecture without the extreme security measures surrounding primary command functions. This will work, Eleanor confirmed, immediately moving to the main terminal. Lisa, I'll need your assistance with the connection protocols. As the two women worked to establish secure access, Richard coordinated with Thomas and Rebecca to maintain perimeter awareness and communications. The elegant efficiency of their teamwork, his children operating as trained intelligence professionals rather than the corporate executive and musician he had believed them to be, continued to disorient him even as he admired their capabilities. I'm in, Eleanor announced after several tense minutes. Accessing the defense network architecture now. The screens displayed cascading code structures, complex protocol hierarchies that represented America's missile defense capabilities. Eleanor navigated through them with impressive speed, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she sought familiar patterns within the evolved system. There, she murmured, isolating a specific segment. That's Demeter's basic command structure, modified, but the foundation remains. Can you implement the override? Richard asked, standing behind her chair. Working on it. Eleanor's focus was absolute, her expression reflecting intense concentration. The original failsafe was designed as a recursive authentication loop, essentially creating a logical paradox that forces the system to revert to baseline settings. And the baseline would be clean, original installation parameters before any modifications. Eleanor continued working, periodically consulting with Lisa on specific technical details. If successful, it would purge Grant's alterations along with any other unauthorized changes. As minutes ticked by, Richard maintained external situational awareness, periodically checking security feeds Rebecca had accessed. So far, their presence remained undetected, but experience told him that advantage wouldn't last indefinitely. "We have movement," Thomas reported quietly from his position monitoring the corridor. "Security patrol. Standard pattern, but approaching this section." "How long?" Richard asked. 3 minutes. Maybe 4. Eleanor didn't look up from her work. "I need at least 5 to complete the override sequence. It's more extensively modified than I anticipated." Richard made an immediate tactical decision. "Rebecca, create a diversion in Section C. Thomas, prepare for immediate extraction on my signal. Lisa, stay with Eleanor and be ready to move the moment she completes the sequence." As Rebecca departed to implement the diversion, Richard positioned himself near the door, mentally calculating engagement scenarios if security personnel breached their location before Eleanor completed her work. 2 minutes to intercept," Thomas updated. "Almost there," Eleanor responded, her voice steady despite the pressure. "The system is accepting the override parameters, but it's requiring sequential authentication." On the monitors, Richard could see security personnel responding to the diversion. Rebecca had created some kind of environmental alarm in a distant section of the facility. The patrol that had been approaching their location paused, receiving new instructions before redirecting away from their position. "Security diverted," Thomas confirmed. "But it's temporary. We have maybe 8 minutes before they resume normal patrol patterns." "Understood," Eleanor acknowledged, continuing her intricate programming work. Entering final authentication sequence now. The tension in the room was palpable as Eleanor executed the final commands. For several heart-stopping moments, the system appeared to freeze, the monitors displaying unchanging code patterns that suggested potential failure. Then, abruptly, the displays cleared and began showing rapid status updates, system after system returning to baseline configurations as the override cascaded through the network architecture. "It's working," Lisa confirmed, monitoring secondary screens. "Grant's modifications are being purged from the command protocols." Eleanor sat back slightly, allowing herself a moment of relief. "The system will complete the process automatically now. Within 15 minutes, the entire defense network should be restored to pre-compromise status." "We need to move," Richard urged, already calculating their exit strategy. "Grant will detect the system reset immediately." They evacuated the monitoring station with practiced efficiency, Thomas leading with security awareness, while Richard covered their rear position. Eleanor moved with the focused composure Richard had come to expect from her, betraying no sign of the pressure she had just endured. Rebecca rejoined them at a predetermined rendezvous point, her expression confirming successful diversion without need for words. Together, they navigated through service areas toward their extraction point, a maintenance exit where their transport waited. They had almost reached it when alarm sirens began blaring throughout the facility. "That's not for us," Lisa said, checking her secure phone. "That's a facility-wide security alert. Something bigger is happening." Thomas accessed a nearby information terminal, his expression growing grave as he read the emergency notification. "It's Grant. She's initiated some kind of secondary protocol at the Pentagon. The entire defense network is going into lockdown." She had a contingency plan, Eleanor realized. A dead man's switch in case her primary approach was compromised. "Which means what, exactly?" Rebecca asked. It means, Richard answered grimly, that stopping her remote access wasn't enough. She's implemented a physical override at the Pentagon itself. We need to get back there, Eleanor said immediately. If she's activated a localized override, that's where we need to be to stop it. Richard assessed their options with rapid tactical calculation. The helicopter is compromised. Security will have locked down all aerial approaches. We need ground transportation. I can help with that, Rebecca offered, already moving toward a different exit. Follow me. She led them to a staff parking area where several government vehicles were stationed. With impressive efficiency, she appropriated a secure transport van, overriding its electronic systems with specialized equipment from her seemingly ordinary phone. Intelligence services has its advantages, she noted at Richard's raised eyebrow. As they sped toward the Pentagon, Lisa maintained communication with Ironclad's security team, who were monitoring the rapidly evolving situation. Grant has physically accessed the primary command center, she reported. She's implemented manual overrides of the missile defense targeting systems. Targeting? Eleanor questioned sharply. I thought she was just demonstrating vulnerability. Apparently her plan has escalated, Richard observed grimly. Desperation often pushes people beyond their original intentions. The implications were chilling. If Grant had moved from demonstration to actual targeting, the situation had evolved from institutional manipulation to potential catastrophe. How long to the Pentagon, Eleanor asked. 22 minutes in current traffic. Thomas answered from the driver's seat. Possibly faster with emergency protocols. Implement them, Richard directed. This qualifies. With emergency lights and sirens activated, they made better progress through the congested DRC traffic, though each minute still felt agonizingly long, given what might be unfolding at the Pentagon. What's her endgame now? Rebecca questioned. If she's actually targeting systems rather than just exposing vulnerability, what is she trying to accomplish? Control, Eleanor answered, her expression thoughtful despite the tension. In our conversation, she repeatedly emphasized fixing a broken system. If she believes she's lost her chance to force reforms through demonstration, she might be attempting to establish direct control instead. By threatening an actual launch, Lisa asked incredulously. Not to execute it, Richard clarified, following Eleanor's reasoning. To prove she could thereby demonstrating the ultimate system failure and forcing immediate implementation of her security protocols, which she would design and oversee, Eleanor concluded, ensuring no one could ever again do what she herself just did. The Pentagon came into view, its massive structure now surrounded by heightened security additional personnel, vehicle checkpoints, and visible tactical teams positioning around the perimeter. We'll never get through the main security, Thomas observed. We don't need to, Richard countered. There's a maintenance tunnel access point near the south parking structure, used for emergency services and utility crews. And you know this how? Rebecca asked. I make it my business to know all potential entry and exit points for facilities where I work. Richard replied simply, particularly ones with national security implications. Thomas navigated toward the indicated access point, which showed less visible security presence than the main entrances. As they approached, Richard outlined a rapid tactical plan. Thomas and Lisa will create a diversion at the east checkpoint, something technical requiring immediate attention. Rebecca will use her credentials to access the maintenance tunnel. Eleanor and I will proceed to the command center. And once there, Eleanor asked, we'll have to improvise based on the situation. Richard admitted, but between your technical knowledge and my tactical experience, we should be able to adapt to whatever we find. The plan executed with remarkable precision. Thomas and Lisa successfully drew security attention with a convincing technical emergency. While Rebecca's credentials, not yet flagged in the system, despite their earlier escape, gained them access to the maintenance tunnel. 30 minutes, Rebecca told them as they prepared to separate. After that, assume my credentials have been compromised and proceed accordingly. Understood, Richard confirmed, sharing a brief but meaningful look with his daughter. Be careful. You too, Dad, she replied, the professional facade momentarily giving way to genuine concern. Eleanor and Richard moved swiftly through the utility tunnels, using service stairs to descend toward the secure levels where the command center was located. Both maintained vigilant situational awareness, communicating primarily through gestures and brief whispered exchanges. Grant will have altered security protocols, Eleanor noted as they approached level B4. Standard access won't work. We don't need standard access, Richard replied, leading her to what appeared to be an ordinary maintenance panel. Emergency override. Only senior military commanders and certain security personnel know about these. He removed the panel, revealing a manual security bypass designed for use during critical system failures. With practiced movements, Richard entered a complex sequence that temporarily disabled the electronic locks on the nearby security door. Impressive, Eleanor acknowledged as the door opened. Your military background continues to prove valuable. As does your technical expertise, he returned, the mutual respect between them now complete and unquestioned. They proceeded through darkened corridors, encountering surprisingly little resistance, suggesting most security personnel had been deployed to perimeter positions rather than internal stations. This tactical miscalculation worked in their favor as they approached the command center entrance. Through the reinforced glass panels, they could see Evelyn Grant inside, working intently at the primary control station. Two armed security personnel stood nearby, while technical staff monitored various systems under apparent duress. Hostage situation, Richard assessed quietly. She's isolated the command center and forced the staff to assist her. Can we access the secondary controls? Eleanor asked. If I could reach the auxiliary systems, I might be able to counter her commands. Richard considered their options. There's an environmental control room adjacent to the main center. It has limited access to core systems for maintenance purposes. That might work, Eleanor agreed. Lead the way. They reached the environmental control room without detection, using Richard's knowledge of the facility's layout to avoid security cameras and patrol routes. Once inside, Eleanor immediately began assessing the available systems. I can access the command center's security protocols from here, she determined after brief examination. Not the defense systems directly, but possibly enough to disrupt whatever Grant is doing. How long will you need? 10 minutes to establish connection, perhaps another 5 to implement countermeasures. Richard checked his watch. Rebecca's credentials will be flagged in approximately 12 minutes. We need to move faster. I'll do my best, Eleanor replied, already immersed in the technical challenge. As she worked, Richard maintained surveillance of the command center through a maintenance viewport, observing Grant's activities and security positioning. What he saw increased his concern. Grant appeared to be in the final stages of some critical operation, the technical staff working frantically under her direction. Eleanor, he said urgently, we're running out of time. Whatever she's doing is nearly complete. Almost there, Eleanor responded, her concentration absolute. I've accessed the security systems. Now I need to... Her words were cut short as the door to their position burst open, armed security personnel flooding into the small room with weapons drawn. Hands up, don't move, the lead officer commanded. Richard and Eleanor complied immediately, recognizing the futility of resistance in their current position. The security team secured them efficiently, confirming their identities via communicator, before escorting them forcibly toward the command center. As they entered, Evelyn Grant turned from her workstation, her expression showing mild surprise but no real concern at their appearance. Ms. Harlow, Mr. Blackwood, she acknowledged coolly. Persistent, I'll grant you that, though ultimately unsuccessful. What have you done, Evelyn? Eleanor demanded, surveying the various display screens showing missile defense systems in unusual configurations. What was necessary? Grant replied simply. Since you interfered with my controlled demonstration, I've been forced to implement more direct measures. You've compromised the entire defense architecture, Richard observed, his tactical assessment taking in the command displays. Created a vulnerability that could be exploited by foreign actors? Temporarily, Grant confirmed. just long enough to prove my point. In approximately 30 minutes, I will demonstrate to the Joint Chiefs and the President that our most critical defense systems were completely accessible to internal manipulation. Then I will implement the comprehensive security protocols I've developed, protocols that would have been ignored without this demonstration. And if something goes wrong, Eleanor challenged, if someone else exploits this vulnerability while you're making your point, calculated risk, Grant repeated her earlier assessment. Sometimes the system must bend to avoid breaking entirely. Eleanor took a step forward, ignoring the security officer who tensed in response. Evelyn, listen to me. I understand your motivation. I understand wanting to fix a broken system that failed someone you loved, but this isn't the way. It's the only way, Grant countered, her composure finally showing cracks of emotion. I've spent decades trying to implement reforms through proper channels. Reports buried, recommendations ignored, warnings dismissed, all because acknowledging the problems would require accountability no one was willing to accept. So you'll risk national security to force that accountability? Richard asked, his tone deliberately neutral rather than accusatory. I'm creating national security, Grant insisted. After today, these vulnerabilities will never exist again. My protocols will ensure that. Your protocols, Eleanor emphasized. Your vision, your control. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not fixing the system, but controlling it. Something flickered in Grant's expression, a moment of doubt or perhaps recognition. Before she could respond, a communication alert sounded from the main console. Deputy Director Grant, a voice announced. We have a situation developing. Unauthorized access detected in multiple defense networks. Foreign origin. Grant turned sharply to the console. That's impossible. I've isolated the systems from external connection. Not external, the technician clarified, his expression grave. The access is utilizing the same vulnerabilities you exploited. Someone else has detected the opening you created. The implications landed with devastating clarity. Grant's demonstration had created a window of opportunity that others, likely foreign intelligence services, constantly probing for such weaknesses, had immediately detected and were now exploiting. Shut it down, Eleanor urged. Restore the baseline configurations before it's too late. Grant hesitated, clearly calculating implications and alternatives. For a moment, professional training seemed to war with personal mission in her expression. She's right, Richard added, his voice carrying the authority of decades of security experience. Whatever your intentions, the situation has evolved beyond your control. National security must take precedence now. The decisive moment hung in the balance as Grant considered her options. Then, with visible reluctance, she turned to the console and began entering commands. Initiating system restore, she announced, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. Returning to baseline configuration. As Grant worked, Eleanor moved closer to Richard, speaking quietly. Even if she succeeds, the vulnerability has been exposed. Others will attempt to exploit it again. Yes, he agreed, which means comprehensive security reform actually will be necessary now. Exactly what she wanted, Eleanor observed, though not how she intended to achieve it. The command center hummed with urgent activity as Grant and the technical staff worked to restore systems and secure against the unauthorized access attempts. Security personnel maintained their vigilance, but their focus had shifted from Eleanor and Richard to the more immediate threat developing on their monitors. In this moment of crisis, previous adversaries found themselves allied in common purpose, protecting the systems all had dedicated their lives to securing, whatever their methods or motivations had been. As the immediate danger gradually receded, Eleanor found herself standing beside Richard, their shoulders nearly touching as they observed the restoration efforts. Despite the circumstances, she felt an unexpected sense of connection, a partnership forged through adversity that transcended professional collaboration. What happens now? She asked quietly. Richard's gaze remained on the activity before them, but his hand briefly found hers, a momentary contact that conveyed both reassurance and something deeper. Now, he replied, we rebuild. Together. The word contained implications beyond the immediate security crisis, a recognition of the personal connection that had developed between them, unexpected but increasingly valuable to them both. Eleanor's fingers briefly returned the pressure of his before they separated, maintaining professional distance as the situation continued to unfold around them. Whatever came next professionally or personally, they would face it as partners who had discovered in each other something neither had expected to find again: trust, understanding, and the possibility of a future not defined by the walls they had built around themselves after loss. The road ahead would not be simple. Explanations would be required, accountability assigned, systems reformed. But in this moment of shared purpose and connection, both Eleanor and Richard recognized that the walls of time that had separated them for so many years had finally begun to crumble, revealing a path forward neither had anticipated, but both now welcomed. When the Pentagon systems finally stabilized, Eleanor and Richard stood side by side in the soft glow of monitors, their reflections ghosting across darkened screens. Two strangers, 2 weeks ago, now bound by something neither had sought but both had found. The walls we build after loss are masterpieces of self-preservation, invisible to others, but impenetrable to ourselves. Eleanor's careful boundaries, constructed over 7 years of widowhood, Richard's fortress of duty and obligation, erected after burying the woman who had made his house a home. Yet sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal what truly matters. Sometimes we need to face destruction to remember how to build something new. In the quiet aftermath, as they watched the sunrise paint Washington's monuments in amber light, their hands found each other without pretense or hesitation. Two people who had spent decades guarding what remained of their hearts, now willing to risk one more vulnerability. Some walls protect us from danger. Others merely protect us from living. The most difficult question isn't whether to build them, but when to let them fall and who to trust when standing in the ruins, exposed and uncertain, but finally free to begin again. What walls have you built that might be keeping out something beautiful?